Guys, I need to tell you about a situation that's been puzzling me for weeks here in my neighborhood. Every single night, without exception, a man brings my married neighbor home from work. And look, it's not her husband. You know, it's a completely different man. Someone I've never seen around here before, and the worst part is the way she acts when she arrives. You won't believe what I discovered at the end of this story. Here on our channel, every day I bring you a new story or gossip I see behind the scenes here in my neighborhood. And today's one, folks, is going to blow your mind. So stay tuned, because the ending to this story is absolutely surprising, and I'm sure you'll want to leave your thoughts in the comments. Enjoy the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling us if you've ever experienced a similar situation in your neighborhood. And please, stay tuned, because what I discovered will truly surprise you. Well, let me start from the beginning so you can understand this whole story. I've lived in this house for over 15 years, and I can say I know every movement on my street like the back of my hand. I know every neighbor, every routine, every detail that happens around here by heart. The house across the street is where Elena lives, a woman in her early 30s, married to Miguel for almost 10 years. Elena has always been an exemplary neighbor, you know? One of those polite, friendly people who always greets you when you pass by. She's worked at a marketing firm since before she got married, and she's an intelligent, dedicated woman who always seemed very responsible and focused to me. The kind of person you'd never imagine involved in any kind of scandal or suspicious situation. Miguel, poor guy, is an even more reserved person. He's worked at an accounting firm for over 12 years, and he's a hard-working, honest man who's never given anyone a reason to speak ill of him. He's always polite to me and all the neighbors, the kind of person who stops to chat about the weather, ask how the family is doing, and offer help when someone needs it. They always seemed like a normal, stable couple to me, without any major ups or downs. They weren't the kind of couple who makes a scene in the street, who fights loudly for everyone to hear, nor the kind of overly affectionate couple who kisses in front of everyone. They were balanced, discreet, each respecting the other's space, but showing just the right amount of affection. Their routine was pretty predictable, and I eventually got used to their schedule. Miguel leaves for work early, around 7 in the morning, always very well groomed, with that serious but friendly demeanor of someone who takes their job seriously. He drives a dark blue sedan they've had for years, a well-maintained car, always clean, and never a problem. Elena also has her own schedule. She always left around 8 in the morning, also well-dressed, but in a more modern, cool way. She works in marketing, so she always dressed more creatively, colorfully, with interesting accessories. She drove a small, very feminine red car that perfectly suited her personality. Ultimately, Miguel always arrived home around 7 o'clock. His routine was always the same. He'd park his car in the garage, grab his briefcase and a few other things from the back seat, greet his neighbors when he met someone on the street, quickly check the mailbox for mail, and then head inside. Sometimes I'd spend a few minutes chatting with other neighbors about casual topics, but it never took long. Elena had a slightly more flexible schedule, usually arriving home between 6:30 and 7 in the evening. She also had a well-established routine. She'd park her red car in front of the house, grab her purse and sometimes a few shopping bags from the back seat, wave at me when she saw me at the window, and occasionally stop to chat with other neighbors nearby. It was a predictable, calm routine, repeated day after day without much variation. On weekends, sometimes they went out together. Other times, they each did their own things. Elena liked to tend to the plants on the balcony. Miguel preferred to stay indoors, reading or watching television. An ordinary life, without much excitement, but seemingly harmonious. But exactly 6 weeks and 3 days ago, yes, I counted, I began to notice that something had drastically changed in Elena's routine. And when I say drastically, I mean it was a very abrupt change, very noticeable to anyone accustomed to her behavior patterns. First, her red car simply disappeared from the front of the house. From one day to the next, it was gone. At first, like any normal person would, I thought she'd taken it to the mechanic. Cars always break down when we least expect it, right? Especially older cars like hers, which had been in use for a few years. I waited a few days to see if the little red car would return, but it never did. A week passed, then 2, and the car still hadn't shown up. I started to find it strange because even when we take our car in for longer repairs, we usually get a backup car or some alternative form of transportation that's more independent. And that's exactly when I started noticing something very, very strange. Every night, without missing a single day, around 7 or 7:15 at the latest, a silver car would stop right in front of Elena's house. And from inside the car, she would get out, always with an expression on her face that I couldn't quite make out from a distance, but it was definitely not her usual carefree expression. What immediately caught my attention was the man driving the car. It wasn't Miguel. I was absolutely certain of that from the first moment. He was a visibly different man, taller, thinner, with lighter hair, and always wearing sunglasses, even in the late afternoon when the sun was almost setting and the light was fading. Guys who wear sunglasses at this time of day, especially in a car, driving late in the afternoon. This struck me as suspicious from the first day I saw it. It was as if he was trying to hide his face, as if he didn't want to be recognized by anyone who might be watching. The first thing I thought, and I think anyone would think the same thing, was, does Miguel know about this situation? Because look, the timing of this whole thing was very convenient, very calculated. The time this mysterious man dropped Elena off was absolutely the time Miguel was still at work. He wouldn't arrive until after 7, and this man always left her before that, between 7 and 7:15. It wasn't a coincidence. It was planning. It was as if they knew perfectly well what Miguel's routine was and arranged everything so he never saw what was happening. I started paying closer attention to every detail because something about this story wasn't quite right. The car was a silver sedan, mid-range model, neither new nor old, but always impeccably clean and waxed. It seemed like a well-maintained car, owned by someone who cares about appearance and first impressions. The man always got out of the car when he arrived, walked all the way around to the passenger side, and opened the door for Elena as if she were an important lady, as if she were someone very special to him. Guys, that already seemed very intimate, very personal, for a simple co-worker or casual friend. And Elena, my God, the change in her behavior was glaring, impossible not to notice. Before, when she arrived home driving her own car, she would get out completely naturally and unconcernedly, grab her things from the back seat without rushing, greet whoever was nearby, and enter the house at her own pace. But now, stepping out of this mysterious man's car, she seemed like a completely different person. She kept glancing around nervously, anxiously, as if checking to see if anyone was watching, if anyone was paying attention. And when she saw me in the window, instead of waving naturally as she'd done for years, she'd just duck her head quickly and almost run into the house. This really intrigued me because it made no sense at all. Why would someone change their behavior so much, become so nervous and evasive, if they weren't hiding something very serious? And why would they feel embarrassed when seen coming home, if it was something completely innocent and normal? If it had truly been just a casual ride from a colleague or friend, she would have no reason to act so strangely, so different from the natural and spontaneous way she'd always behaved with me and the other neighbors. The change in behavior was so obvious that anyone with the slightest observation would have noticed something was wrong. Something that also really struck me from the first few days was the way they said goodbye. It wasn't a quick, casual farewell, as would be completely normal between co-workers or friends who are just giving her a ride out of kindness. They talked for several minutes in the car before she got out, and I could tell by their gestures and body language that it was a very intimate, very close, very emotionally charged conversation. Sometimes I'd see her touching his arm while they were talking, and he'd do the same in return. Other times she'd lean toward him in a way that seemed far more intimate than would be appropriate for a simple friendship or professional collaboration. After she finally got out of the car, they would exchange glances through the window for a few more minutes, as if they didn't want to be separated, as if each goodbye was difficult for both of them, and he only put the car in drive when she was fully inside, as if making sure she was safe and secure. Guys, this is the behavior of a man in love, of someone who cares far more than he should about a woman who's supposedly just a co-worker. No normal co-worker would show this kind of care, this kind of protective attention to someone whose husband is waiting at home for her. And there's another detail that made me even more suspicious from the start. On weekends, when Miguel was home, this mysterious man would completely disappear. It was as if he knew exactly when he could and couldn't show up, as if he had intimate knowledge of the family's routine. This was definitely no coincidence. It was pure strategy. It was detailed knowledge of Miguel's schedule and habits, which indicated that there was indeed something being hidden, something that couldn't be discovered by her husband. I began religiously writing down the times to make absolutely sure I wasn't imagining things or exaggerating my interpretations. Monday, 7:10 p.m. Tuesday, 7:05. Wednesday, 7:15. Thursday, 7:12. Friday, 7:08. The regularity was impressive, almost military in its precision. And always before Miguel arrived home from work. There was no room for error, no chance of an accidental encounter between the two men. It was a perfect schedule, calculated down to the smallest detail. One night I was watering the plants on the porch when they arrived a little earlier than usual, and I overheard bits of their conversation. I couldn't understand everything, but I did catch a few stray phrases that intrigued me even more. I heard her laugh in a way I'd never ever heard her laugh with Miguel in all our years as neighbors. It was a freer, more joyful, more spontaneous laugh, as if she were genuinely happy and completely relaxed. It was the kind of laugh we have when we're with someone who makes us feel good, who understands us, who awakens positive feelings in us. And his tone of voice was also completely different from what I would imagine for a professional conversation or casual friendship. It was very affectionate, very protective, very intimate. I heard him say things like, "Be very careful," and "If there's anything, any problem, call me immediately," which made me immediately wonder, why would a simple coworker speak so protectively? And why would she need to call him if she had a problem, when she had a husband at home who should be the first person to call if she had any difficulties? It didn't make sense unless there was a much deeper emotional involvement than she let on. Another thing I began to notice as the days went by was that she always arrived with a completely different facial expression than the one she had when Miguel arrived home from work. The difference was glaring, impossible to miss for anyone paying even the slightest attention. When Miguel arrived home each night, she greeted him mechanically, automatically, as if it were a social obligation, an emotionless habit. She was cordial but cold, polite but distant, as if she were playing the role of devoted wife without truly meaning it. But when she got out of this mysterious man's car, she always had a small smile on her face, a dreamy expression, as if she were remembering something wonderful that had just happened. Her eyes shone in a strange way, as if she were carrying within her a secret happiness she couldn't share with anyone. This made me think deeply about the situation. Had her marriage with Miguel long since broken down? Had she found in another man what she could no longer find or feel at home? Because the difference in behavior was so obvious, it was embarrassing to observe. It was as if she had two completely different personalities, one for her husband and one for the mysterious man. And it became increasingly clear which of the two was the real Elena, which of the two truly reflected how she felt inside. And there's one more thing that left me extremely intrigued and suspicious. Sometimes when she got out of the car, she'd carry shopping bags or packages that clearly weren't work-related, not things someone would take to the office or bring home at the end of the day. One time, and this really struck me, I saw her getting out of the car carrying flowers. Flowers, people. A small but beautiful bouquet, the kind of well-arranged one someone buys or receives for a special reason, when there's a feeling involved. What kind of coworker gives flowers to a married woman? And what married woman accepts flowers from another man and takes them home where her husband can see them? Unless she hid the flowers, which would be even more suspicious. The situation was becoming increasingly obvious to me, increasingly impossible to ignore. Every sign, every behavior, every bit of evidence pointed to the same inevitable conclusion. Elena was having an affair, and this mysterious man was her lover. The exaggerated caution in their schedules, the radical change in behavior, the obvious intimacy between them, the gifts, the long and emotional conversations, the stark difference in how she reacted to him versus how she reacted to her own husband. Everything, absolutely everything, made sense within this interpretation. And I started to feel really, really bad for Miguel. He would come home every day, greet the neighbors cordially, walk in to find his wife freshly wedged in by another man, chat with her about his day at work, and have absolutely no idea what was really going on right under his nose. How could a person be so naive, so trusting, so oblivious to the obvious signs happening around them? Or was he suspicious of something, but simply pretending not to see it because it was easier than facing the painful reality? These questions began to torment me day and night. I was torn between two very difficult positions. On the one hand, I thought he had every right to know he was being betrayed so blatantly, right to his face, every day. On the other hand, I wondered if it was really my business to meddle in other people's private lives, even if they were close neighbors. But man, when the situation happens right in front of you, every day, at the same time, with the same routine, how can anyone remain completely indifferent? It was impossible to ignore, impossible to pretend not to see. And with each passing day, the situation seemed to grow more serious, more intense, more obvious. It was like watching an accident unfold in slow motion, knowing someone was going to get hurt, but not quite knowing how to intervene. Stay tuned, because what I discovered will completely surprise you. After weeks of watching this whole situation unfold before my eyes, I decided to dig deeper into who this mysterious man was, apparently destroying a marriage right under my nose. And girls, you won't believe it, but things only got stranger, more suspicious, more complicated. The first thing I decided to do was try to find out as many details as possible about this man. I began observing absolutely everything. His license plate, which I tried to write down over and over again, his specific style of dress, his exact arrival and departure times, his mannerisms, any small detail that might give me a clue as to who he was and the precise nature of his relationship with Elena. His car, as I mentioned, was a silver mid-range sedan, well-maintained and always impeccably clean. It wasn't new, but it wasn't old either. It was in that range of vehicles that demonstrate the owner's financial stability, but not excessively so. It was the kind of car an upper-middle-class professional would drive. After many attempts and much effort, I finally managed to write down the full license plate during one of the days when they spent the longest time talking in the car. I even considered trying to find the owner's name through the license plate, but I thought that would be taking my investigation too far. The man appeared to be in his 40s, perhaps a little younger, but definitely in that mature, established age range. He was well-dressed, always impeccably groomed, wearing crisply pressed dress shirts or good quality polo shirts, dress pants that appeared to be a good brand, and shoes that were always polished and well maintained. She was definitely someone who worked in an office, in a position that required good personal presentation, just like Elena. This made me wonder if they actually worked at the same company, or at partner companies, or had met through work somehow. But what intrigued me most, and this was becoming increasingly obvious, was his ingenuity with Elena's family's schedules and routines. He knew Miguel's schedule perfectly. Absolutely perfectly. He knew exactly when he could show up and when he couldn't, when it was safe and when it wasn't. This wasn't coincidence or luck. It was intimate, detailed knowledge of the family routine. How did he know so many specific details about Elena and her husband's personal lives if he were just a casual friend or distant colleague? Someone had told him, and it had probably been Elena herself. One thing I started to notice more closely was that they definitely weren't coming straight from work to her house. The marketing firm where Elena works is located downtown, in a commercial area I know well. If they were coming straight from there, they would have arrived via a completely different route along the main avenue. But they always arrived from the opposite side of the street, as if they'd taken a detour, as if they'd stopped somewhere specific before coming to her house. And this made me wonder about a possibility that gave me chills. Where might they stop before she returns home? Will they have dinner together at a romantic restaurant? Will they go somewhere more intimate and private, like a motel? Will they spend a few hours together somewhere else before she has to return home to play the role of devoted wife? The possibility that they were having intimate encounters before their rides home left me completely convinced that it was definitely an extramarital affair. No other explanation made sense with all the details I was observing. I also started paying attention to how they dressed and presented themselves. Elena always left home in the morning wearing a specific work outfit, usually something more formal, more professional. But when she returned at night, even wearing the same basic outfit, something always seemed different. Her hair was styled differently, as if it had been messed up, and then put back together again. Her makeup was clearly touched up, more elaborate than she normally wore to work. And sometimes, this was very obvious, she wore a perfume that I could smell from afar as she passed by on the sidewalk. It was a different perfume than she usually wore, more striking, more sensual, more seductive. The kind of perfume a woman wears when she wants to impress someone special, when she wants to be remembered by her scent, when she wants to make a lasting impression on someone important. And he, the mysterious man, was always impeccably dressed, as if he'd dressed up especially to meet her. This is definitely not normal behavior for a coworker who's just giving her a ride out of kindness. A coworker who's just being helpful doesn't dress up so elaborately, doesn't wear perfume, and doesn't care so much about their appearance. One afternoon, I decided to be more daring in my investigation. I went downstairs to water the plants in front just as they arrived, to see if I could overhear more details of their conversation, to observe their interaction more closely. And what I heard made me even more convinced that something was very wrong, very suspicious going on. I heard her whisper, but not so soft that I couldn't hear her. "Thank you for another wonderful day." And he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "For you, I would do anything, absolutely anything." Oh my God. It was a declaration of love in broad daylight, in front of the house where she lived with her husband. How could they dare? And how could they not feel remorse for what they were doing to two families? Wonderful day is the kind of thing we say when we spend special, intimate, romantic moments with someone. It's not the kind of thank you give for a normal day at work or a simple ride. And his response was even more revealing. "For you, I'd do anything." This is a declaration of love, of devotion, of someone completely in love. No normal colleague would speak that way to a married woman, especially not with such emotional intensity. I kept listening and heard more things that confirmed my suspicions. He said, "I'll pick you up tomorrow at the same time as always." She replied, "Are you absolutely sure it's not too much trouble for you?" And he said, "It will never ever be a hassle to take care of you. It's what makes me happiest in the day." Oh my God, taking care of you. It's what makes me happiest in the day? What man says that to a married woman if he isn't completely in love with her? And what married woman accepts being taken care of by another man in such an intimate, protective way? From that day on, I began to observe even more closely every physical gesture between them, every body language, every way they interacted, and you wouldn't believe the things I saw, the obvious displays of intimacy I witnessed. When she got out of the car, he always held her hand for a few seconds longer than would be normal or appropriate for casual acquaintances. It wasn't just a polite handshake, it was a lingering, affectionate, intimate touch. Sometimes he even lightly stroked her hand with his thumb before letting go. When she leaned in to whisper something in his ear, they were much closer than would be appropriate for a professional relationship or casual friendship. She practically pressed her face against his, and he didn't pull away. On the contrary, he seemed to enjoy the proximity. I once witnessed a scene that left me shocked and absolutely certain there was romance involved. I saw him adjusting a strand of her hair that had been blown out of place by the wind. Guys, that's the kind of gesture a boyfriend, a lover, someone who's physically intimate with another person would make. No coworker, no matter how close, would make this kind of intimate gesture toward a married woman. It's a gesture that implies familiarity, intimacy, and the right to touch another person affectionately. And she accepted the gesture completely naturally, as if it were something that happened frequently between them. Sometimes she'd return the affection too. I've seen her touch his face very gently, place her hand on his chest when they were talking about something more serious, straighten the collar of his shirt when it was a little disheveled. They were small but extremely intimate gestures, demonstrating a level of physical familiarity that definitely goes beyond the boundaries of any professional relationship or platonic friendship. I also began to notice that on rainy days, he would always get out of the car with a large umbrella and accompany her to the front door, completely shielding her from the rain. On very sunny days, he would wait patiently for her to step into the shade of the porch before leaving. These are the gestures of a man in love, someone who cares deeply about the well-being and comfort of the woman he loves. These aren't casual kindnesses from a helpful colleague. They are loving attentions from someone who is emotionally invested. And the most suspicious, the most compromising thing I witnessed, one afternoon I saw him gently kiss her hand before she got out of the car. Kissing the hand, people. What man kisses a married woman's hand if he's not courting her romantically? And she didn't shy away, didn't think it was strange, didn't show any discomfort. On the contrary, she smiled in a way that made me absolutely certain there was something very intimate, very special happening between them. It was the smile of a woman in love, of someone being courted by the one she truly loves. I also began to observe Miguel's reaction when he arrived home from work after these daily meetings. He always arrived about 20 or 30 minutes after Elena, and never, ever seemed suspicious of anything. I greeted her normally, asked how her day at work had been, if she'd had a good lunch, if nothing special had happened, and she responded completely naturally, with the greatest nerve in the world, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if she hadn't just emotionally said goodbye to another man. This left me thinking deeply about Elena's personality. Either Miguel was extremely naive and overly trusting, or she was a superb actress, able to completely conceal her true feelings and emotions. How can someone live this double life so convincingly? How could she act so normal and affectionate toward her husband after having spent such intimate and emotionally charged moments with another man? Her ability to deception both impressed and frightened me. One thing I also started to notice is that Elena's general behavior at home had changed significantly since this whole situation began. Before, she would always spend the afternoon on the porch, watering the plants, tidying the pots, chatting with other neighbors who passed by, and relaxing after work. It was a time of relaxation for her, a time to catch up with her neighbors, to take care of the things she enjoyed, to make that natural transition between work and home life. She always seemed like a sociable person who enjoyed this interaction with her neighbors. But after she started arriving with this mysterious man, she'd go straight home and only emerge again when Miguel got home from work. It was as if she needed this time alone to recover emotionally, to return to her role as a devoted wife before her husband arrived. And this further confirmed to me that something was very wrong. If it was truly just an innocent ride, she wouldn't need time to regroup or get back into the wifely role. She would still be the same natural, spontaneous person she always was. I also began to notice that on weekends, when Miguel was home all the time, Elena would become visibly strange, somewhat absent, as if her thoughts were constantly elsewhere. Several times I saw her staring out the window with a melancholy expression, as if missing someone. And this longing obviously wasn't for Miguel, who was right there beside her. It was longing for someone else, someone she could only see on weekdays, someone whose presence made a real difference in her emotional life. On Saturdays and Sundays, when she should have been more relaxed, happier to be with her husband, she seemed a little depressed, a little restless, as if weekends were an obligation to be fulfilled rather than a pleasure to be enjoyed. And there's one thing that made me even more intrigued and suspicious. On weekends, Elena's phone rang much more than it did during the week, and she always answered quickly, as if she'd been expecting these calls, as if they were important to her. But the most suspicious thing is that she always spoke very quietly, almost whispering, so that Miguel couldn't hear what was being said. And when he approached to find out who was calling, or what it was about, she always ended the conversation quickly with a, "I'll call you back later," or "We'll talk later calmly." What kind of phone conversations does a married woman need to hide from her husband? And why did she only receive these mysterious calls when Miguel was home, precisely when she couldn't speak freely? To me, it was more than clear that it was her lover calling her, taking advantage of the weekends to stay in touch, to catch up, to plan future dates, and she couldn't speak openly because her husband was nearby. I once witnessed a scene that completely broke my heart for Miguel. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and he was in the garage washing his car, whistling, looking content with life. Elena's phone rang. She answered and began talking quietly, but I could tell she was smiling, looking very happy and excited about the conversation. Miguel noticed the change in her demeanor and approached, curious to know who it was. He asked matter-of-factly, "Who is it, honey?" "Someone from your family," she quickly replied. "Oh, just a friend from work, nothing important." But I could tell by his expression that he found it strange because the way she spoke was not the way you'd talk casually with a friend. And the worst part was that when she ended the call, she had that little smile on her face, that dreamy expression I always saw when she got out of the mysterious man's car. Miguel tried to engage her in a sweet conversation, to talk about his plans for the day, but she was clearly distracted, thinking about something else, someone else. Guys, how can a man not realize his own wife is in love with another man? The signs were so obvious it was painful to watch. Either he truly didn't understand anything, or he pretended not to see it, because it was easier than facing the devastating reality. I began to feel incredibly bad about the whole situation. On the one hand, I felt immense pity for Miguel, who was being betrayed so blatantly, without knowing it. On the other hand, I couldn't help but notice that Elena seemed much happier, more fulfilled, and more alive after starting this relationship with the mysterious man. It was as if she had discovered a version of herself that had been dormant for a long time. She was more careful with her appearance, more smiling, more energetic. It was clear that something very positive was happening in her emotional life. Was their marriage really over long ago? Were they already living more like roommates than a loving couple? Did she find in the other man what she could no longer have or feel with Miguel? Or was she simply being selfish, wanting the best of both worlds? The security and stability of marriage and the passion and excitement of an affair? This possibility bothered me deeply because it meant she was being unfair to both men. These questions swirled around in my head day and night, giving me no peace. And the situation only grew more complicated and evident with each passing day, because the signs of intimacy and emotional involvement between Elena and the mysterious man were becoming increasingly obvious and difficult to ignore. It was as if they were becoming more and more comfortable with the situation, less and less concerned with hiding their feelings for each other. And this left me with the impression that perhaps they were planning to take a more definitive step soon, perhaps committing to the relationship or making some radical decision about the future. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the end of this story, because what I discovered next will completely change your opinion of this whole situation. You have no idea what twist is coming. Starting in the 3rd week of watching this whole situation unfold before my eyes, things started to get even more intimate, even more suspicious, even more impossible to ignore. And guys, I confess I was becoming increasingly torn between telling Miguel absolutely everything or simply pretending I wasn't seeing anything and letting life take its course. But how can a person pretend not to see a situation like this happening right in front of them every day? It was impossible for me to ignore it. Impossible not to feel involved. Impossible not to worry about the consequences all of this would have for everyone involved. One particular Thursday afternoon, something happened that left me with the absolute, definitive, unquestionable certainty that an extramarital affair was happening right under my nose. It was one of those rainy autumn days, with that persistent rain that makes you want to stay home and stare out the window. And I was doing just that when the silver car arrived. The rain was really heavy, the kind that soaks you in seconds, and I saw him quickly get out of the car with a large, elegant umbrella. But instead of simply walking Elena to her front door like he did on other rainy days, this time something completely different happened. They stood under the eaves of her house for several minutes, much longer than a normal goodbye would have been necessary. And even though I was standing a distance away, I could tell they were having a very intense, very emotional, very sentimental conversation. And then something happened that nearly gave me a heart attack. I saw him cup her face with both hands in an extremely delicate and loving way, as if she were the most precious thing in the world to him. They stared into each other's eyes for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. For a moment, I thought they were actually going to kiss right there, in front of the house where she lived with her husband. They didn't quite kiss on the lips, but their faces were so close that I could practically feel the romantic tension in the air, even watching from afar. She placed both hands on his chest, right over his heart, and they remained like that, motionless, staring at each other with an intensity that left no doubt about their feelings. It was a scene from a romantic movie, one of those scenes you see in the cinema, and sigh with emotion. This exchange of passionate glances, this intimate closeness, this moment of profound connection between them lasted at least 3 or 4 minutes. It was clear there was true love there, a real passion, a deep feeling that went far beyond any superficial attraction or casual fling. After that, she finally went home, but not before turning around several times to watch him leave. She stood at the living room window, her hand on her chest, as if trying to control her breathing, as if her heart was racing with emotion. And he, from the car, stared at the house for at least 5 minutes before he managed to leave. It was as if neither of them could completely separate themselves, as if each goodbye was a small emotional torture for both of them. That scene left me deeply shaken and heartbroken for Miguel. How can a man be betrayed so intensely, so passionately, so emotionally, and yet completely unaware of it? How can a man be so oblivious to his own wife's feelings? And how can a woman experience this overwhelming passion with another man and then return home to play the role of devoted wife to her husband? Her capacity for deception and emotional control impressed and frightened me at the same time. The next day, Friday, I decided to pay even closer attention to the smallest details because I wanted to be absolutely certain of what was happening before making any decisions about how to proceed. And girls, what I discovered left me even more shocked, even more convinced that the situation was completely out of control. First, I noticed that Eleanor was physically different, visibly transformed. It wasn't just a matter of being more well-groomed or more careful with her appearance. It was something deeper, more internal that shone through in the way she walked, smiled, and moved. She was radiating a different energy, a vitality I hadn't seen in her for a long time. It was as if she'd discovered a new version of herself, as if she'd awakened after a long sleep. Her eyes shone in a way I'd never seen before, even though I'd known her for so many years. She was dressing more elaborately, more feminine, more sensually. It wasn't over the top or flashy, but it was noticeable that she was taking much better care of herself, appreciating herself more. She wore clothes that better highlighted her body, colors that suited her better, and more interesting and well-chosen accessories. Her makeup was always impeccable, much more elaborate than she usually wore to work. It was clear she was dedicating much more time and attention to her appearance. And that only happens when you want to impress someone special, when you want to always look beautiful for someone important. And her perfumes, my God, her perfumes had completely changed. She was wearing much more striking, more sophisticated, more sensual fragrances. I could smell them when she walked down the sidewalk, and they were definitely not the same perfumes she wore before this whole situation started. A woman who's been married for years, settled into a marital routine, doesn't completely change her perfume style out of the blue. She doesn't invest in more expensive, more sensual fragrances without a very specific reason. And that reason had a name: the mysterious man in the silver car. Third, and this was what shocked me the most and left me with no doubt, she was clearly wearing different lingerie, more sophisticated, more beautiful. How did I know this? Because sometimes when it was windy or when she moved a certain way, I could see small details through her clothes. The bra straps that peeked out discreetly were made of elaborate lace with delicate details. The undergarments, which sometimes showed through lighter blouses, were clearly much more beautiful and elaborate than the basic, practical lingerie a long-married woman typically wears on a daily basis. This confirmed to me definitively that she was getting ready for someone, getting ready to be seen and admired by someone specific. And it definitely wasn't for Miguel because he left the house before her and only saw her again at night, when she was already in her home clothes. All of this together, the physical transformation, the increased care with her appearance, the change in perfumes, the more sophisticated lingerie, left me absolutely convinced that she really was living a great romance parallel to her marriage. No one changes so much, so profoundly, so visibly, without a very strong emotional reason. And that reason was the love she felt for another man, the passion she was experiencing away from her husband's eyes. One thing I also started to notice more closely is that in the days leading up to the weekends, especially on Fridays, their goodbyes became even longer, even more emotional, even more charged with feeling. They would talk in the car for 10, sometimes 15 minutes before she could get out, and I could see through the windows that it was a very intense, very engaging conversation, with lots of gestures, lots of discreet caresses, lots of emotion involved. It was as if they were preparing to go a few days without seeing each other, as if each weekend were a small eternity of forced separation. The difficulty they had in saying goodbye was evident, palpable, and heartbreaking to observe. One particular Friday, I witnessed a scene that left a deep impression on me and left me even more convinced that they were experiencing a true, intense love that went far beyond a simple fling or physical attraction. I saw her crying in the car, not dramatic crying, but silent tears streaming down her face as they talked. He was comforting her in the most loving way possible, running his hands through her hair very gently, wiping away her tears with his fingers, whispering things in her ear that were obviously words of love and comfort. After a few minutes, he held both her hands and said something that made her smile through her tears. It was a beautiful, emotional, passionate smile. It was clear he had said something very special, something that touched her heart deeply and soothed her. It was such an intimate scene, so charged with true feeling, so full of genuine love, that it left me with the impression that perhaps they were discussing the future of their relationship, planning some radical change in their lives. Was she seriously considering leaving Miguel to be with the person she truly loved? Were they making plans to go public with their relationship? Or was she simply suffering from not being able to be with the person she truly loved? These possibilities swirled around in my mind for days, and poor Miguel came home every night with no idea of the intense emotional drama unfolding in his wife's life. He greeted her with his usual warmth, asked about her day with genuine interest, and told her about his work, and she responded with the utmost naturalness. It was a perfect performance, a flawless portrayal of the satisfied and devoted wife. How can a person be so convincing while hiding such intense feelings? How can they control their facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language to appear completely normal when inside they're experiencing overwhelming passion? I was beginning to realize that perhaps I didn't know Elena as well as I'd thought during all those years of being neighbors. The friendly, polite, and seemingly transparent woman I knew might have been just a social facade, and beneath that facade lay a much more complex person, much more capable of deception than I had ever imagined. The following Saturday, something happened that made me certain that the situation was reaching a critical point, a crossroads where some definitive decision would have to be made soon. Miguel had gone out to take care of some business at the bank and do some shopping, and Elena was home alone. It was a quiet Saturday morning, sunny but not much traffic on the streets. Suddenly, I saw the silver car driving slowly down the street, much slower than would be normal for someone simply heading somewhere. It was obvious he wanted to see her, but he couldn't stop because it was the weekend, and Miguel could show up at any moment. He passed once, then came back and passed again, then once more. The fourth time he passed, Elena appeared at the living room window and waved discreetly at him. It was a small wave, almost imperceptible, but loaded with meaning. He stopped the car at the end of the street, and they stared at each other from afar for a few minutes. It was an absolutely cinematic scene, like the ones we see in romantic films. Two lovers who love each other deeply, but cannot be together due to circumstances. The emotional tension was palpable even from a distance. They wanted to be together, needed to be together, but couldn't because of her husband, who could arrive at any moment. It was a situation of forbidden love, of impossible passion, of shared suffering. After a few minutes of this mutual contemplation, she disappeared from the window, probably because she heard some noise that made her think Miguel was coming back. And he left, but driving very slowly, as if he didn't want to get completely away from there. When she returned home, the expression on her face was one of pure melancholy, of heartbreak, as if she were going through emotional torture at not being able to be with the one she truly loved. It was clear that she was suffering greatly from the situation. At that moment, I had a kind of revelation about the whole situation. Maybe Elena wasn't exactly the villain I'd imagined. Maybe she really was in love, experiencing a great true love that she couldn't embrace because she was trapped in a marital situation that perhaps no longer made emotional sense to her. I started observing the dynamics between her and Miguel more closely on the weekends, and I noticed things I hadn't noticed before or hadn't interpreted correctly. They actually talked very little. When they were home together, they each had their own world. He watched television or worked on the computer. She cleaned the house, tended the plants, or read a magazine. There was no longer that natural complicity, that spontaneous intimacy that a couple in love should have. When they did go out together, which happened very rarely, they usually returned in silence, as if they'd spent time together but without truly connecting, without discussing important or interesting things. It was as if they were two polite acquaintances sharing the same space out of convenience. There was no longer that chemistry, that special energy that exists between people who love each other romantically. It was a cordial, respectful, but cold coexistence, a peaceful coexistence, but without passion, without emotion, without that special spark that true love brings to a relationship. This made me think deeply about the nature of their marriage. Were they already living more like roommates, like friends sharing responsibilities, than as a couple genuinely in love? Had the romantic love between them worn thin over the years, turning into a brotherly affection, a practical partnership, but lacking that emotional intensity that makes a relationship truly special? And if that were the case, did Elena have the right to seek emotional happiness elsewhere? Was she wrong to have fallen in love with someone who made her feel alive again, who awakened feelings she had forgotten existed? These questions tormented me because they had no easy or obvious answers. On the one hand, I still believed that betrayal is betrayal, that commitments made must be respected, that Miguel didn't deserve to be deceived like this. On the other hand, I was beginning to understand that perhaps the situation was more complex, more nuanced than I'd initially thought. Perhaps it wasn't simply a matter of right and wrong, of villain and victim, but rather a complicated human situation where everyone involved was suffering in some way. After almost a month and a half of watching this whole situation unfold before my eyes, I decided I needed to find out once and for all who this mysterious man was, apparently at the center of this whole emotional plot. I couldn't sleep well anymore. I was constantly thinking about Miguel being cheated on, and I felt a moral responsibility to set the record straight somehow. Curiosity was consuming me, and concern for the well-being of everyone involved was leaving me genuinely distressed. I felt I needed to better understand who the protagonists of this story were before deciding whether or not to intervene in any way. So, I devised a more elaborate investigative plan. The following Monday, I planned to be watering the front plants exactly when they arrived. But this time, with a very specific goal. I wanted to get a good look at the license plate. I wanted to hear more details of their conversation. I wanted to observe more closely every aspect of their interaction. Around 6:50, I positioned myself strategically on the porch, with the watering can in hand, pretending to be tending to the plants, but actually completely focused on the street, waiting for them to arrive. I had even prepared a few casual questions in case I got a chance to chat with Elena. And didn't they arrive exactly on time? As always, their punctuality was impressive, almost military in its precision. They were organized people who took their commitments seriously, who respected established schedules. This time, I was able to not only note down his full license plate, but also observe even more specific details about the mysterious man. He appeared to be between 35 and 40 years old, of average height to tall, with a well-groomed physique and light brown, slightly wavy hair that appeared to be regularly cut by a good stylist. He wore prescription glasses, not sunglasses as I'd initially thought. Modern, well-chosen glasses that gave him an intellectual, professional air. And then I saw something that completely changed my interpretation of the situation. He wore a gold wedding band on his left hand. Wedding ring! The discovery shocked me, and at the same time made me realize that the situation was even more complicated and problematic than I had imagined. It wasn't just Elena who was cheating on Miguel. It was a double betrayal. She was cheating on her husband, and he was cheating on his own wife. Two families were potentially being destroyed because of this extramarital affair. Two innocent people, Miguel and this man's wife, who had no idea what was going on behind their backs. The scale of the situation had escalated dramatically, and what shocked me most was that, even wearing a wedding ring, even though he was obviously married, he made no effort to hide or disguise his emotional involvement with Elena. On the contrary, he became increasingly affectionate, more attentive, more obviously in love. This made me wonder, was he unconcerned about the consequences for his own family? Was he willing to risk his marriage for this passion? Or was he, like Elena, also living in a marriage that no longer satisfied him emotionally? When she got out of the car that particular day, I witnessed one of the clearest declarations of love I've ever heard. He held both her hands and said, in a voice loud enough for me to hear clearly, "You're the best thing that's happened to me in years." And she replied, her eyes shining with emotion, "You've changed absolutely everything for me too." I didn't know I could feel like this again. My God. It was a declaration of mutual love in broad daylight, in front of the house where she lived with her husband. How could they be so explicit? And how could they feel no remorse or guilt for what they were doing to their respective families? "I didn't know I could feel this way again," was a phrase that revealed a lot about Elena's emotional state in her marriage. It implied that she hadn't felt loved, desired, or special in a long time, that she had rediscovered feelings she thought she'd lost forever. At that moment, I made a decision that had been brewing in my mind for days. I could no longer remain silent. I could no longer pretend I wasn't seeing the situation. Miguel had a right to know what was happening, even if it was extremely painful for him. And the mysterious man's wife also deserved to know she was being cheated on. They were both innocent people living in an illusion, a lie constructed by their own spouses. They had the right to make informed decisions about their own future. I considered several different approaches to the situation. I could write an anonymous letter to Miguel, explaining everything I'd observed. I could try to find out who the man's wife was, and find a way to tell her. Or I could confront Elena directly, and give her one last chance to tell the truth, before I took any more drastic action. Each option had advantages and disadvantages, risks and benefits, but they all seemed better to me than remaining silent, being a passive accomplice to a situation that was hurting innocent people. As I pondered the best approach, things became even more blatant and obvious between Elena and the mysterious man. It was as if they'd reached a point where they no longer cared so much about hiding their feelings for each other. On Tuesday, I saw him give her a tender kiss on the forehead before she got out of the car. It was a long, tender kiss, the kind you give someone very special, very loved. On Wednesday, she leaned in and kissed him on the cheek, very close to his mouth, dangerously close. On Thursday, I witnessed something even more intimate. They embraced for several seconds before parting, a tight, emotional embrace, as if they were two people who love each other deeply and suffer with each forced goodbye. It was as if they could no longer fully control the intensity of their feelings, as if their love was so strong that it spilled over into increasingly, overtly romantic gestures. Or perhaps they were preparing to go public with their relationship and therefore no longer saw the need for absolute discretion. One thing that really intrigued me during this period was that Elena seemed more radiant and happy than I'd ever seen her in all the years I'd known her. Instead of looking guilty, worried, or tormented by the situation she was going through, she seemed genuinely fulfilled, and in love. It was as if being with this man had awakened a version of herself that had lain dormant for a long time, a more feminine, more sensual, more self-confident, more alive version. It was clear that he made her feel special, desired and valued in a way she probably hadn't felt in years. And this made me question my own moral certainties about the situation. Was I being overly judgmental? Does true love, when it happens, justify breaking commitments that may no longer have real emotional meaning? Did Elena have the right to pursue happiness and personal fulfillment, even if it meant hurting people who didn't deserve to be hurt? These were complex ethical dilemmas with no simple or universally accepted answers. These questions kept swirling around in my head, but I always came back to the same fundamental conclusion. Regardless of the motives or justifications, cheating is cheating. Miguel and the mysterious man's wife didn't deserve to be deceived like this, didn't deserve to live a lie constructed by their own spouses. On Friday of that week, something happened that made me certain that the situation was about to take a definitive turn, that some radical decision was being planned or discussed between them. When they arrived, I saw Elena carrying a small suitcase. A suitcase. My heart sank immediately, because this could mean several very serious things. She was planning to run away with him, or they were going on a trip together, or she was preparing to leave home for good. They talked in the car for much longer than usual, at least 20 minutes, and I could tell it was an extremely serious, intense, and emotionally charged conversation. Sometimes it sounded like they were arguing. Other times it felt like they were making very important decisions. He held her hands constantly throughout the conversation, and she gestured a lot. Sometimes she seemed to be trying to convince him of something. Other times she seemed to be being convinced. It was clearly a discussion about the future of their relationship, about the next steps they would take. After nearly 25 minutes of intense conversation, she finally got out of the car with her bag and walked to the front door. But before she entered, something happened that struck me deeply. She turned to him and made a gesture that clearly seemed to say, "Give me a few more days to decide," or "Give me a little more time." He nodded with a very affectionate but also worried expression, blew her a kiss through the car window, and stood there for a few minutes as if he didn't want to leave, as if he wanted to make sure she was okay. This time, instead of leaving immediately as he usually did, he circled the block and passed her street twice more, driving very slowly, looking in the direction of her house. It was as if he couldn't bring himself to walk away completely, as if he was aching to leave her. That left me absolutely tense and worried. Was Elena really planning to abandon her marriage to be with him? Was the suitcase for a romantic getaway they were planning? Or was she finally gathering the courage to ask Miguel for a divorce and start a new life? The weekend that followed was one of the most tense and distressing I've ever witnessed as a neighborhood observer. Miguel was home as usual, but Elena seemed completely different. Extremely nervous, anxious, agitated, as if she were experiencing a profound internal conflict. I saw her repeatedly checking her phone compulsively, as if she were waiting for a very important message that could change the course of her life. And when the phone rang or a message arrived, she would answer or check it immediately, always speaking very quietly or responding quickly. Miguel tried to strike up a conversation with her all weekend, tried to be affectionate, tried to include her in joint activities, but she was clearly elsewhere, completely distracted, unable to focus on anything other than the emotional situation she was experiencing. At various points throughout Saturday and Sunday, I could see her crying quietly when she thought Miguel wasn't looking. They were silent tears, those of someone going through a major dilemma, a very difficult decision that will drastically affect her own life and the lives of others. And when Miguel asked if everything was okay, what had happened, why she seemed so worried, she always gave vague excuses. She had a headache, she was tired from work, she was worried about unimportant professional problems. He clearly didn't completely buy these excuses, because he knew her well enough to know when something truly serious was going on. But he also didn't push too hard, perhaps out of respect for her privacy, Or perhaps because he was afraid of discovering something he didn't want to know. On Sunday night, I witnessed a scene that broke my heart and made me want to intervene immediately. Elena was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and Miguel came up behind her and hugged her, affectionately, trying to be affectionate, trying to reconnect emotionally. But she pulled away from the embrace so obviously, so abruptly, so awkwardly, that even I, watching from afar through the window, felt the tension of the moment. It was a clear, unequivocal physical rejection that showed how emotionally disconnected she was from her husband. He stood there for a few seconds, completely confused and hurt, as if he couldn't understand why she had rejected such a simple gesture of affection. Then he left the kitchen with his head down, visibly sad, probably wondering what he had done wrong to deserve such coldness. It was a very painful scene to witness, because it clearly showed how their relationship had deteriorated, how she could no longer even accept basic displays of affection from her own husband. And the saddest part is that Miguel obviously didn't know why she was acting this way. He had no idea she was in love with another man, no idea he was competing emotionally with someone who knew her wants and needs much better. That night, I made the definitive and final decision. On Monday, I would approach Miguel and tell him absolutely everything I had observed over the past few weeks. I could no longer be a silent accomplice to this situation, no longer passively watch the emotional destruction of an innocent person. I spent the entire evening and all of Sunday mentally rehearsing what I was going to say, how I was going to start the conversation, how I was going to present the facts clearly and convincingly without sounding like a nosy, gossipy neighbor. I knew it would be one of the most difficult and delicate conversations of my life. I thought about starting by saying something like, "Miguel, I need to talk to you about a very serious situation involving Elena." Or maybe, "Miguel, as your neighbor and someone who cares about you, I need to share something I've observed that I think you have a right to know." It was crucial that he understand that I wasn't telling him out of malice or pleasure in creating trouble, but rather out of genuine concern for his well-being. I wanted him to understand that I had struggled with myself before making the decision to speak out, that it hadn't been an easy or frivolous decision. On Monday morning, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in a long time. I was nervous, anxious, worried about the consequences, but convinced it was the right thing to do. I waited for Miguel to leave for work as usual, and planned to approach him when he returned that afternoon, before Elena arrived with the mysterious man. I wanted to have this conversation at a time when he had time to process the information, to ask questions, to decide how he wanted to proceed, without the pressure of having to confront the situation immediately. But what happened on that particular day completely, radically, definitively changed my perspective on the entire situation I had been following for so many weeks. And you won't believe it. You won't be able to imagine what I actually discovered about this whole story. Guys, subscribe to the channel, because if you do, you'll be notified when I post new videos. Like the video too, and leave your thoughts on this story in the comments, because what happened next will completely change your opinion on everything. It was Monday, and I was determined to tell Miguel everything when he got home from work. I'd rehearsed how I'd begin. "Miguel, I need to talk to you about something very serious about Elena." I was nervous but convinced it was the right decision. But around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, something unexpected happened. I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, I was startled. It was Elena, her eyes red from crying. "Ms. Ruth," she said in a choked voice, "can you talk to me? I really need to talk to someone, and I have no one else to talk to." Guys, imagine the shock. There she was, the very person I was going to tell my husband everything about, asking to talk to me. "Sure, Elena, come in," I said. I made some coffee and we sat in the living room, and what she told me changed everything I thought about the situation. "Ms. Ruth, You must have noticed that I haven't been driving my car home lately, right? I confirmed that I had noticed. Well, my car broke down over a month ago, and the repair is a nightmare. It's an engine part that was defective from the factory, and the mechanic said it will take at least another 2 weeks to get the right part. Car broken down. My world started to fall apart. And Eduardo, my co-worker, offered to give me a ride every day until the car was ready. He lives nearby, so it's not a detour at all. Eduardo. The mysterious man had a name and was just a helpful colleague, but there was still much to explain. Eduardo is just like that, very affectionate and attentive to everyone, she continued. He's been married for 15 years, has 3 children, and his wife jokes that he has a mother's heart. The alliance made sense now, but I still needed to figure out other things. Elena, but I've noticed you seem very different lately. More put together, happier. She sighed deeply, and then came the revelation that explained everything. Mrs. Ruth, I've been going through a very serious depression for the past few months. I hadn't been able to smile properly for over 6 months. I didn't feel like getting ready or taking care of myself. Depression. The word dropped like a bomb. Elena was depressed, and I hadn't realized it. Miguel was worried, but I couldn't explain what I was feeling. It was like I was in a gray fog, without energy, without hope. When my car broke down, I thought it was the end of the world. But Eduardo, who had noticed I wasn't well, offered to help. During those rides, we talked a lot. He's also been through depression, so he understands what that internal struggle is like. The long conversations in the car were emotional support sessions, not romance. He gave me valuable advice, helped me find a psychologist, and encouraged me to start taking care of myself again. That's why I started dressing up again and wearing nice clothes. It wasn't to impress anyone. It was to feel better about myself. The changes in appearance were part of the recovery, of self-esteem. And do you know why I was crying on Friday? She asked. Because Eduardo was able to speed up the repair of my car. It will be ready next week. I was crying with gratitude. The tears were of gratitude, not heartbreak. And the suitcase you saw, it was clothes for a work party. Eduardo helped me carry it because it was heavy. Another misinterpretation of mine. Ms. Ruth, can I confess something? I noticed you were watching, and at first I was worried you might think something wrong. But I thought if you've known me for years, you'd know I would never do anything to hurt Miguel. At that moment, I wanted the earth to swallow me. She knew I was watching, and she still trusted my judgment. Elena, I need to apologize. I really thought things I shouldn't have thought. Imagine, Mrs. Ruth, you were worried about me and Miguel. That shows that you care about us. We spent more time talking. She told me how the treatment was helping, how understanding Miguel had been, how their marriage was growing stronger. Miguel knows everything. He was the one who suggested I keep accepting Eduardo's rides, because he knew the conversations were doing me good. He even invited Eduardo and his family to dinner here, to say thank you. When she left, I reflected on how I'd created a dramatic soap opera based on superficial observations. For over a month, I lived convinced of a betrayal that didn't exist. Every affectionate gesture I interpreted as seduction was a natural kindness. Every conversation I thought was romantic was emotional support. Every smile I found suspicious was a sign of recovery from depression. The following week, Elena's car was ready. I saw her driving up, beaming with joy at having regained her independence. And on the last day, Eduardo brought her home. His wife was in the car with their 3 children. They stopped to say goodbye together. I saw the children hugging Elena, his wife saying a loving goodbye, a family welcoming a friend in need. That's when I completely understood how wrong I'd been. It was a genuine support network, not an affair. After this experience, I learned the most important lesson. Don't draw conclusions based solely on what you see from the outside. Our minds can create dramatic narratives where only human kindness exists. Elena continued to recover from depression. Her marriage grew stronger. And Eduardo, He's still that wonderful person who helps without expecting anything in return. This story taught me that there are still good people doing beautiful things every day. It showed me the importance of giving the benefit of the doubt before judging. How often do we create soap operas in our minds about simple situations? How often do we suspect the worst when we witness the best of human nature? So girls, let me know what you think of this twist in the comments. Have you ever experienced anything similar? Subscribe to the channel for more neighborhood stories, and don't forget to like the video. The next story is about the neighbor